God started a revival in the preaching of Charles Haddon Spurgeon, for the people flocked to hear him. They came to hear the preacher in the church instead of the preacher of the church having to go to them. And they came. They came to the New Park Baptist Church. They came to temporary meeting houses and music halls. They came to the Metropolitan Baptist Tabernacle, a facility that was constructed with 5,000 seats and had room for 1,000 standees, 6,000 persons. And Spurgeon filled it up on Sunday morning and Sunday night for 30 consecutive years. They came. They came to the Surrey Garden Music Hall on October the 19th, 1856. Spurgeon would preach there for the first time, and 10,000 people filled that place. James Earl Massey calls preaching the burdensome joy, and Gardner Taylor calls it the sweet torture of Sunday morning. But on that day, there was no joy, there was burden. There was no sweetness, there was torture. For in that crowd of 10,000 people, some mischief makers screamed out, "Fire! Fire!" A stampede ensued, and 7 people were left dead, and 28 people were injured. This shadowed the life of Spurgeon, plunging him into a pit of depression out of which he would never emerge for the rest of his life. And it served as a symbol for the horror that can befall the very people of God. On September the 11th, 2001, I stood up in my classroom, S305, to open up our day's work by calling for prayer requests. I was not prepared for what I would hear, for I had not watched the news before I left home. I hadn't turned the radio on while I was making my way to school. Dr. Smith, I think we ought to, in light of the most recent development, pray for our country. In light of the fact that a plane guided by terrorists has flown into one of the Twin Towers. Before that class was over, the second tower was struck. And America, since that time, has been shadowed by this disaster, plunged into a pit of depression, and it has served for us a symbol for how horror can fall upon any nation at any time. We are here to walk with Saint Charles Haddon Spurgeon, not to copy him, but to try to comprehend him and to understand his understanding of preaching. He said, and these are his words, "Preaching is for the glory of God." He said, preaching that is done aptly is done to accomplish 2 purposes. 1, the edification of the saints. 2, the salvation of sinners. And he shows us how both of these come together in his sermon, Songs in the Night, taken from Job 35:10. "Where is God my maker, who giveth songs in the night?" He opens up the sermon by referring to the Aeolian harp. He says the Aeolian harp renders sweet music when the wind blows through the strings. But the difficulty is when there is no wind. He says a singer can sing as long as there is light to read the notes on the music sheet. But the difficulty comes when there are no rays of light from the sun. Then the skillful singer has to reach inside of himself to his living existence and come in contact with his spirit and sing from the interior book. He says, any fool, these are his words, any fool can sing during the day. He says it's unnatural to sing in trouble. It's unnatural to sing at night. Therefore, the believer gets his songs from God, for God gives songs during the night. We have not come here to mourn. We have come here to sing. I've come here to sing. I've seen the lightning flashing. I've heard the thunder roar. I've felt sin's breakers dashing, trying to conquer my soul, but I heard the voice of Jesus telling me to still fight on. He promised never to leave me, never to leave me alone. This teaching pericope, chapter 8 of Romans 18 through 30, gives to us a movement from glory to glory. Verse number 18, he says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth being compared to the glory that shall be revealed. The uninaugurated glory, the unrealized glory, the not yet glory. Paul is saying there's a glory that's going to be ours, but it's not yet. It's in the future. And when I think about that, I think about what Goethe, this German poet, renowned, said. He said that he watched a puppy being born. As soon as the puppy was born, he picked up the poor puppy and pulled it by the ear. And he said the puppy's eyes that were closed, he was trying to strain to look toward the light. And there is something within us, since we are made in the image of God, that strains for the Son of Righteousness, who rises with healing in his wings. There's something there. This world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. My hopes and all my treasures are laid up there in the blue. The angels beckon me from heaven's open door, and I can't feel at home in this world anymore. There's a straining toward the not yets. This is the way John puts it in 1 John 3 and 2. He says, it does not yet appear what we shall be, future. But we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is. Dr. Gardner Taylor astounded me with this remark, but to show what God is doing in our lives, he said that when Jesus appears and the Son, small s, of God stands next to the Son of God, capital S, the angel will look at us and we will look so much like Jesus that the angels will ask, who's Jesus? Because it have not yet appeared. We will be like him, for we shall see him as he is. It's future glory. But there's present glory. Verse number 30. For since he has predestinated us, he also has called. And those whom he has called, he has justified. And those he has justified, he has also, present, glorified. We have within us the imago Dei. We have the image of God. And we can never find rest, according to Augustine. Thou hast made us for thyself, and our souls cannot find rest until they find rest in thee. But we want more of what we already have. We want more of the glory. We want more of this Christ. James L. Massey was preaching at the E.K. Bailey International Conference on expository preaching Wednesday night at the Concord Baptist Church. And he lifted up this illustration. He says, when a baby is disgruntled and upset and crying uncontrollably, the mother will pick up that baby and press that baby against her breast. And after a while, that baby will be comforted and stop crying. He explained it this way. That baby has become reconnected with the primal tone, the heartbeat of the mother. It goes back to the time when it was in the womb of the mother and heard that heartbeat all the time. But now that it has come out of the womb, It is only when it is pressed against the breast of that mother that it hears the primal tone. We long for the primal tone. Sunday morning is not enough. We want to be somewhere where the wicked ceases from troubling and the weary is at rest, and every day is Sunday, and we have uninterrupted worship. I wonder about us sometime. 1 hour is too much for us. But when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. What are you going to do when there is no benediction? What are you going to do when there is no intermission? What are you going to do when there is no interlude? Praising my Savior all the day long. We move from glory to glory. This teaching paragraph, this teaching pericope, also gives to us a theology of the cross and a theology of glory. It's right there in verse 18. I consider that our present sufferings, theology of the cross, are not worth being compared to the glory, theology of glory, that is to come. But there is a trilogy of groans. Verse 22. Creation groans. In fact, the Greek has it, creation groans together. It is univocal groaning. It is groaning with one voice, all creation groaning. Why? Because when Adam and Eve sinned, when sin came into the world as a result of the disobedience of humanity, it ricocheted off of humanity and affected creation. And the penalty that humans were suffering was also inflicted, if you will, on creation. So the creation lost its equilibrium, lost its balance. And now roses had thorns. And the lion no longer would lie down with the lamb. And the leopard would no longer lie down with the bear. And we had earthquakes and tornadoes and hurricanes. And ever since that day, sin has wreaked havoc on creation. And creation is groaning, desiring for Isaiah 65 and 17 to be fulfilled. God will make new heavens and a new earth. But not only is creation groaning, verse 23, creatures are groaning. We are groaning. Believers, saints are groaning. Why would we groan? Paul has just told us in chapter 8, verse 15, that because of our relationship, because the Greek has it in terms of adoption, son placing, we've been placed in his family, which severs our former ties. We are in his family now, and therefore we can cry out, Abba, Father. Why would we groan? Verse number 16 tells us that because of this, that the Spirit testifies with our spirit that we are the children of God. Well, if the Spirit testifies with my spirit and says, you're God's kid, why would I groan? Verse 17 says of Romans 8 that we're not only heirs, but we are joint heirs with Christ Jesus. That what he has, we have. My God, if we have all of that, why would we groan? The text says in verse 23, this image of the first fruits of the Spirit, which is synonymous to what Paul is talking about in Ephesians 1:13 and 14, that the Spirit is the earnest, the deposit, the down payment, if you will, your ID card, that you are a card-carrying member that proves that you belong to the family of God. And since my name is written in heaven and my witness is on high, and you can't get to it, to delete it, to erase it or white it out, it's there permanently. Seems to me that we'd have no reason to groan, but we do. Why? Because we're waiting for the adoption of sons. Well, Paul, I thought you just got finished saying in verses 15 to 17 of the same chapter that we've already been adopted, that the Spirit has already testified that we are the children of God, that we can cry out, Abba, Father, because he is our Father, and that we're heirs and joint heirs of Christ. Then what do you mean? Since you've said we were sons, now you're saying we're waiting for the adoption of sons. My spirit has been adopted. I don't have a soul, I am a soul. I am redeemed spiritually, but my body is not. My body is decayed. If you don't believe your body is decayed, I know that some of us can take a look in the mirror and get high looking at ourselves, but keep on living. You're going to discover that something going on in my body. I'm not the same. And there's no sense of being married for years and telling your wife, you know, you don't look the same. Have you looked in the mirror lately? You don't either. Something is happening to our bodies. We are breaking down. Old Mother Johnson at our church used to say, there's a leak in this old building, and my soul has got to move to a building not made by hand. This body knows that it can't go to heaven this way. It's waiting for full adoption. And so, therefore, creatures, saints, groan. But God groans. Verse 26. Likewise, in the same manner, the Spirit helps. That same word, help, is found in Luke 10:4, where Martha says to the Lord, tell Mary to help me. The Spirit, the pneuma, helps, becomes the paraclete for us, stands alongside of us to assist us and help us. Why? Because we don't know what to pray. Therefore, the Spirit intercedes for us with groanings that cannot be interpreted, groaning sighs too deep for words. And then the Spirit, who searches our hearts, knows the mind of the Spirit, prays for us in accordance to the will of God. My groan is swallowed up in his groan. Maybe my groan is transcended by his groan. Maybe when I'm trying to say it and I don't have the words, I can't articulate it, maybe God, the Spirit, takes my groans, interprets my groans, and tells God what I was trying to say, but I wasn't able to say. Is it possible that when pressure is really on you, when there are losses in your family, when there's unemployment, when there are relational rifts, when disease is in your body and you don't know what to say? I don't care what your GPA is. I don't care what kind of linguist you are. You just can't come up with the words. And when you try to form the words, they get stuck in your throat. And the only thing you can do is just groan. I was just talking to Dr. Ross this morning, and he said that his wife said that a heartfelt groan is sometimes better than a sung anthem. Because if you can't say it, he understands. In fact, he could even understand your tears. Tears are a language that God understands, and that's all you can give him are your tears. He'll take your tears and put them in a bottle against the day of remembrance, because God understands. Maybe that's one of the things God does. But maybe, because verse 27 ends with these words, that he makes intercession for us in accordance with God's will. Maybe the Spirit has to take my groan, my desire, my yearning, which is misdirected because I'm praying according to my felt and perceived needs. And the Spirit has to take my groans and my prayers, straighten them out and say, God, this is what he means and this is what he wants, but this is show what he needs. Brothers and sisters, things in themselves may not be good, but God can bring a good purpose out of it for those who really love God and to those who are called according to God's purpose. When I look at the tragedies that have taken place in America, I wonder how God can bring good out of them. They run like lines of credits in movies across the screen of my mind. Columbine, Katrina, Jonesboro, Virginia Tech, where a 76-year-old Jewish professor of engineering stood in front of the door, giving enough time for students to climb to the edge of the window and jump out to safety. And he suffered the consequence of this deranged assailant taking his life. How can God bring any good out of that? Well, as horrible as that is, there is something that is even more horrific, that looked senseless, that looked meaningless, so meaningless that the Jews called it a stumbling block and the Greeks called it foolishness. For the Jews couldn't understand how that could be a blessing when they said, "Cursed be the man that hangs on the tree." It was ridiculous, so ridiculous the way we look at it, that God didn't even watch it. The Father turned his back on his Son, and earth started protesting. Midday became like midnight. The earth reeled and rocked like an inebriated man. Peter and 6 disciples went back fishing, and 2 on the road from Jerusalem went back to Emmaus. It was horrible. Nothing good could come out of that, but you have to hang around long enough, because 3 days later, God caused it to work together for good, because God had a purpose to bring out of it. And sure enough, on Friday, it looked meaningless, it looked ridiculous. On Saturday, it looked hopeless. But on Sunday morning, God brought treasure out of what seemed to be trash. And on Sunday morning, he rose from the dead with all power in his hands. Oh yeah, I want to tell you today, as you sit here in your seats, that God is the one who can take a groan and bring glory out of it. Yeah, God, Sister Darlene, as I was talking to you yesterday, can bring you joy in the midst of your storm, because I suffered the same thing 23 years ago. God is able to take your life and straighten it out so that you can bless his name for what he has done. Yes, there will be glory, wondrous glory, glory around the throne of God, glory giving him praise, glory lifting his name, glory. He turns our groans into